just starting up just in a minute. So we got an amazing panel over here. Guys, those of you who have been here since the start, thank you very much. That is really great to have you. And I hope you're having some amazing takeaways, talking about his transformation from being a Marine and into the corporate world. We moved into Soma, who was talking about recruitment industries. And obviously, we also had Stephanie, who was courageous enough to talk about redundancy, right? And then obviously you heard Atul talking about the whole roboticization and the automation transforming the world. Now we got a great panel over here, and I'm gonna take a minute to introduce you all, because we have an amazing diverse panel over here. So on my left here, Alex, if you wave to the audience over there in the camera. So Alex is a specialist in the insurance industry, and he's really working with executives, senior executives across the insurance industry. And those of you who don't know, insurance is one of the highest paying jobs or the industries in Hong Kong. So yes, any one of you who is thinking of joining insurance industry, Alex is your man. Then on the left of Alex, we have Sid. Sid is a generalist recruiter, so he kind of works with every level of management. And obviously, I'm not going to go into details of what he does. Please have a look at his profile. But Sid is the person to help you, with recruitment across industries. And then we have consulting industry represented by Narayan over there. Now, Narayan has a unique perspective, because not only he's worked in multiple geographies, but he's worked in multiple industries. So you talk about retail, pharma, technology. There's a length and breadth of industries worked with. So I'm going to jump right in. Now, today the topic we're going to be talking about is personal branding, right? And the consequence or the implication that COVID-19 had on personal branding. Personal branding in itself is the topic which some of them are familiar, some of the audience, and some of our speakers today touched upon. But exactly how is it impacting people? How is it impacting their brand? What is that they can do about it? So I'm going to start this with actually a review of the current crisis or the current situation. And I'm going to invite Narayan for doing that. So Narayan, the world is impacted. Hong Kong is impacted. So what's your view as a consultant, on the impact of COVID-19 on the general? Just give us a little bit of an update. And may I just invite you to pick up that microphone so that everyone can get your best sound. Thank you.
Thanks, Aalok. First, thank you for this opportunity. And it's a great pleasure to be sharing my perspective. I just wanted to clarify that the views expressed in this forum are personal. Having said that, very interesting question, and like reams and reams have been written about the impact of COVID in Hong Kong, right? Like what initially started as focused on Greater China region, very quickly escalated into a global pandemic. And it's unfortunate. And there was a quote which I came across, and it's been often used, which is like, this crisis, people are like facing the same storm, but almost all of them are in different boats. So it is a health crisis, and it slowly escalated into a financial and economic one. Now, while there is like a lot of gloom and doom, as can be expected, there have also been some pockets of like positive activities, and I hope like this continues to increase more in terms of people's ingenuity in sort of like adjusting to the new normal again, right? So we are in the process of like discovering and like getting adjusted to this new normal, and I'm sure like it's only going to gain traction as the days continue.
Right. Thank you very much for that, Narayan. And I'm going to move on to Sid. So clearly the crisis is quite challenging. Clearly we have a health crisis, we have a job crisis, we have a financial crisis. And when I say that health is something we need to be safe about, we need to be safe about our jobs. But then, it is kind of really hurting a lot of people, Sid. And you working in the generalist recruiter segment at all segments. What have you seen in terms of its impact on the careers and jobs?
Yeah, absolutely. It's absolutely taken the beating. And I just cover Hong Kong, so I'd like to talk more about Hong Kong as a market. Certainly, as people know, in Hong Kong, we had a degree of political uncertainty going back at the back end of last year. COVID obviously is a double whammy. I think it's undeniable the impact that it's caused in terms of sentiment, as well as the job market as well. So certainly taking a beating. Again, like Narayan said, that there are huge pockets of positivity, I think, that is really coming to light over the last 6 months or so. And that, again, just following the last speaker, is in the ecosystem of technology. So the support that the government is providing to various startups, be it Cyberport or various other subsidy schemes that have been provided, it is brilliant, I think, for the Hong Kong economy. And in the next 3 to 5 years, I think we're going to see a very different landscape on, moving away from that traditional banking ecosystem in Hong Kong to a whole technology and a fintech hub more so. Even though Singapore is probably a year or two ahead of us in terms of where we want to be, but I think the opportunity with the population in the GBA, the Greater Bay Area, will just boost that. So that's a quick snapshot of what I'm seeing.
Yeah. No, thank you very much for that, Sid. And I'm going to move on to Alex. And Alex, Hong Kong obviously has a double whammy, and so just touched upon that. Tell us that the double whammy, a little bit more about double whammy for those of us who have not been in Hong Kong or know little about it. Yes, COVID-19, it's not a great phrase, but was the icing on the cake for the problems we were facing. So tell us, are the problems increasing with the national security law, with the protests and all that Hong Kong is going through? What has been your experience?
Yeah, I think. Look, listen, it's been a tough 12 months for Hong Kong in many ways. I think, as you said, double whammy. So there's been a lot of social unrest, political unrest, and tension. It's had an impact on the economy. It's had an impact on just simple logistics during the crisis, getting around, being mobile throughout the city. And I think that escalated over a period of weeks and months, and it was almost like the end wasn't in sight. And then all of a sudden, as you said, the icing on the cake was COVID. It's been a tough time, but I think silver lining for me. I've been in Hong Kong for 12 years, and Hong Kong is a very resilient place. I think everybody here today will agree with that. I think it almost doesn't matter what you throw at Hong Kong. I think people survive. I think that human nature, people want to survive. They want to thrive. Despite the challenges, despite what we're facing, we're still seeing opportunity. We're still seeing positivity in the market, in the city we live in. So I think hopefully encouraging for the future, overcoming the challenges that we face today.
Yeah, thank you very much for that, Alex. And I'm going to invite Narayan to, share a little bit, because I want to flesh the problems a little bit more before we get into the resilience and the solution a bit more. So what are you seeing in terms of the crisis? How is it impacting, generally the economy and the industries you work with, specifically to Hong Kong?
Okay. So I think I can share some perspective on the consumer industry in which I've been very closely linked with. And that's been one of the industries which has been tremendously hit in this crisis. And the nature of the crisis is all about like social distancing. So inevitably, like industries like travel, hospitality, retail, and speaking about like the non-food and like grocery segment, those have like had a tremendous impact. And if you look at it, like I don't think any geography has been immune. Maybe in Hong Kong, we have been very, very fortunate to actually like avert the health crisis. I'm not sure like why this is not being picked up by world media, but Hong Kong, Taiwan, some of the countries which have like fared very well in dealing with this crisis. I'm not sure if it is because of the protests that we are all tuned to actually like being indoors, or is it because of the SARS experience, but at least thank God we are all in a very safe location. When we look at the economic crisis, as you mentioned earlier about the double whammy effect for Hong Kong, yeah, that's true. And world over, it's been the health crisis which has been magnified, and it's taken a hit at like every segment, right? Like headline grabbing news in terms of like unemployment, losses accumulating, and the uncertainty on like when the vaccine is going to be found and like how we are going to come out of this. Of course, these uncertainties were like way too high at the start of this year, but at least now, thanks to the curve flattening across geographies, at least the crisis seems to be getting into some sort of a being controlled by the efforts which have been taken, right? Or at least like we are accustomed to it. We are like comfortable in like, I'm not sure if comfortable is the right word, but we are like sort of like at least we are like able to live with this.
Right. No, absolutely. And this is going to be, promise, my last question on problems, right? Before we kind of get into the solution. And I want to talk about redundancies, right? And I'm going to invite Sid maybe talk about redundancy, and I'm going to give you a tough one, Alex, terminations, right? so and essentially, we don't want to get deep into what it is, but as per you, what is the impact on the personal branding of a person? You know, a lot of people are getting impacted, and obviously, what I want is an employer perspective. You work with a lot of employers. When a person gets redundant and he talks about it, you know, and personally, I notice that salaries negotiation become weaker. So what is the consequences? What are the implication of redundancies on the personal brand of a candidate?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's two different parts to this question. I think one is what is the situation of redundancies in Hong Kong? Which markets, as Nora just mentioned, are the most hit? And then sort of the second part is how do you deal with that? How do you get out of that? So two different things. One is on the redundancy element, there has been a disproportionate impact when it comes to redundancies in Hong Kong. Again, any B2C oriented business has been more impacted than the B2B side of things. Any business that is on a yearly subscription model or a longer sales cycle are able to sustain. But again, when you're relying on a daily sales oriented business model, the impact is very real. So again, in certain sectors, there's nearly 80 to 90% redundancies. I'm talking about F&B, gyms like we all know opening tomorrow, which is good news for them. But again, there has been disproportionate impact. Looking at, I guess, what Hong Kong is more well known for, which is financial services, the impact has been minimal. And that's the reality of the situation. There have been some cuts, again, with financial institutions focused purely on a B2C segment. So if it's a brokerage business where they have daily sales targets, that's hit zero, right? And so again, given most financial services businesses are regulated by SFC, Hong Kong MA, their balance sheet is strong enough to be able to sustain these blows. For how long? That's a good question. And then sort of the second part of the question is obviously how do people feel about it? How are people getting overcoming the situation? It's a mixed bag. It's not that straightforward. We can say people predicted this, through medical professionals, but nobody really impacted or felt the impact of such a deep effect that it would cause in the market. So, absolutely, you go through that whole phase of, shock, sadness, anger, and then, right, what am I going to do next? And something to share with the viewers is actually we have a outplacement service in Hudson as well, along with our recruitment business, and this year has been phenomenal when it comes to inquiries saying, hey, we're looking to confidentially, unfortunately, exit a certain number of staff. What do we do? How do we go about it? And again, there are professional firms like myself and I guess many other firms in the market who can provide this service and soften the blow as much as we can to help people get through it. Again, just coming back and finishing up this topic, there are a variety of ways you can get back in the job market. Like I said earlier on, there are pockets of immense growth and pockets of absolutely negative growth. So it's all about how you perceive it, how you tackle it, how you go through this. I'm sure we can talk about that.
Yeah. No, thank you very much, Sid, about that. And I'm coming to Alex. Alex, what is going to be useful, obviously, is the employer perspective,
Yeah.
right? And then these redundant candidates, and when you represent them, could be a senior executive and or maybe that person got terminated because sometimes termination is a result because the employer doesn't want to give the package, right? So it is not really performance, but let's say they got terminated because the employer could not afford that headcount anymore. So how do employers are viewing these redundant candidates or terminated candidates, if you like?
When they're looking to hire you, maybe. Look, I think sometimes termination can hide behind redundancy. So I think it's really looking at what the truth is in the scenario, what the root cause is. I'd like to believe that everybody has a motivation in life to do well, to do a good job. The reality is that there are factors such as poor performance. There may be cultural differences. There may be team issues. There may be skill gaps. There could be a whole host of reasons why somebody gets let go, essentially. So I think that redundancy, the stigma of redundancy, I think has changed even in Hong Kong. I think because of COVID, because of Hong Kong, during the last 12 months, unfortunately, there have been some people who have been made redundant. So I think as a result of that, there's going to be more people in the same boat. So there's going to be less of a stigma. When it comes to terminations, I think for me it's really looking at what the cause is, as I said. So why has it happened? And maybe that's the opportunity for somebody to look inwards. I think when you're from a company's point of view, there's nothing wrong with hiring somebody that got terminated and lost their job. It's about understanding why. And is it that company, the new company, the new employer, do they have the right platform? Is it a better platform? Do they, in terms of the cultural fit, is that better? All the things I alluded to, I think, is looking at where that chemistry falls into place.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's a great point. I mean, say the thing which is really magic for me is a reality check. What is the truth behind that terminated candidate, redundant candidate? Maybe he's a great guy, and just because of the financial crisis or the COVID-19 crisis, there's a challenge. But I'm going to throw a tricky question to you, Alex, before I'm going to move to Narayan on opportunities. And this is just a follow-up question. Is it a time for employers to get great talent at potentially a low cost?
Yeah, we spoke about this briefly the other day. Look, everybody will have a different view on this topic. I think for me, the opportunity to hire, for want of a better expression, on the cheap is perhaps too short-sighted. I think what it creates in the market is perhaps an opportunity for a company to hire a good individual that's talented, that's got a skill that they need, but pay less for it because of the challenges that everybody's facing in the current market. I think the issue with that, if we look at the fact that things are going to get better, things are going to improve. When things improve, when they get better, that person, that candidate, that employee, they will look for their pay to be realigned with where they believe their value of market rate is, essentially. And I think that's the time when people will jump ship.
Yeah.
So whilst initially it looks like a good prospect, I think the reality is look after the talent you've got. And if you are going to hire talent and you're in a position to do so, hire at market value.
Yeah.
It's still competitive in the current market. Hire for the future and hire to retain for the future as well.
Yeah.
Otherwise, things get better, you end up with a revolving door, you have to start again and maybe pay a premium, and that knowledge experience that you have in that period of time, that person walks out the door to start fresh.
Yeah, no, thank you very much for that, Alex. And I'm just going to do a little bit of follow-up on this question with Sid. And absolutely, I agree with him. When the market is up, and that candidate is going to go away if you don't pay him the market value. But can we come to a mutual kind of an agreement? Let's say I'm an industry like Cathay Pacific, where I can't afford a lot of people, right? And obviously, a lot of employees and friends I know, they kind of said, okay, we are happy with a pay cut, right? So what is your kind of recommendation for employers like Cathay? And what should they do? Should they kind of up the salaries when they can? How should they kind of tackle the situation from both an employee and employer perspective? Because the industry is kind of not in a position now. He comes from a rich industry. Insurance is kind of doing still okay, right? Not airlines, not the restaurants. So what should they do, Royall?
That's a good question. I think if I just go back to Alex's point, I think I agree and I disagree. I think absolutely it's a very short-sighted way to look at employment. But I also believe, any head of HR, any organization that has decent HR policies will not be doing that. I don't think they will be hiring people because they are, for the lack of a better word, cheaper. I think what they would do instead is to hire them on a contract basis. And so there is a respectful mutual understanding to say, okay, this role, we need this person for a 3 or 6 month period of time. We're going to pay you exactly what the market dictates. I can't guarantee what happens 6 months, but there is that mutual respect of get-go. I think that's what I'm seeing more and more. And I think that's the right thing to do because, again, you will have a revolving door if you undercut someone and, you're going to pay recruitment agency fees and among everything else. It's not going to be a cheap exercise. But coming back to the question around, Cathay Pacific and industries that have been hit, I guess, the hardest, I think it's a really tricky situation because on one hand, the business is trying to cost cut. They are trying to look at ways to reduce fixed costs. At the same time, these are business critical hires. You need them. You need to be able to have these people to power through this recession. And that's where, again, this whole flexible working adoption will kick in far more than it ever has. And, I'm in the markets quite a bit. Zoom stocks, we see what happens. I personally think the adoption, the acceleration of employers in contract roles or hiring contractors will accelerate at 5-6 folds. And I think that's the right way to do it. It is, working brilliantly in the Western world. Hong Kong's playing catch up, so is Singapore. China is a little bit further behind. But again, I think there is going to be a very high adoption degree there. I think that's the solution I would advise employees.
Cool. I really love the point you made on contract staff, and I'm going to go to Narayan because I think it does have a relationship with the staff augmentation industry, the temporary staffing industry, the contracting industry, right? And what's your view? I would say I know in Hong Kong and Asia Pacific, and you've been North America where contracting is a big deal, right? I know enough people there who don't want a permanent job, but APAC, they want a permanent job. So what's your advice for people who kind of are running away or shy away from this contract or staff augmented jobs? Any recommendation in it?
I think it's going to be an individual's choice at the end of the day, right? Like it's very difficult to actually paint everyone with a very broad brush because we're not sure on what their motivations are or what the constraints are at that particular time, at that particular point of time to make a choice. But I do agree with Sid on the point made on our temporals, and there's this beautiful term around gig economy, right? I think slowly all of us are gravitating towards that particular space because I think if this crisis was a very short-term kind of a nature, maybe some of the tactical measures which organizations took could have been forgotten. But this is played out for such an extended period of time, and people are very innovative, right? So the moment they've seen some mechanisms actually work better, I think end of the day it's going to become the norm from going forward. At least that's how I've rationalized myself this terminology of new norm, because it's played almost for about 8-9 months now, right? And people's behaviors don't reset that quickly. So I think if someone has made the transition to actually becoming a temp worker or developing multiple skills and jumping from project to project, I think this is a very good period to actually test that out. If that actually suits your style of working, you need security and comfort and stability, which personally I feel is going to be very difficult going forward. Or do you enjoy the intellectual high you get by moving on from projects to projects and solving business problems? So I think one way to look at this particular crisis is to test out and discover if there are any hidden facets to your working style. Because if you're in a drastically impacted industry, there is very little for you to actually do at this point of time, right? So you might as well use this time to actually experiment and see if there is something which you would love doing. And if you actually like doing it, then that becomes your new reinvention going forward.
Yeah. No, thank you very much. And I'm going to kind of pick up that beautiful word you said, new normal. The reason I'm going to pick that up is because I don't see a light at the end of the tunnel, right? This is it, right? And I mean, in spite of the fact we are into this 6 months, 7 months, 8 months, we don't know how long this is going to stay, right? And we had this beautiful blip of rain when Hong Kong opened up, and then suddenly again it went crashing down, everything closed down. So it's going to be new normal, and in a normal situation, we would be sitting in a fancy hotel, get you guys on stage, but we are in a closed room, just 4 of us and a few assistants. The point is that this is it. And how do we make this new normal a personal brand? How do we kind of reach out? So now I'm done with the problems and the opportunities. I want to discover possibilities for the individuals, right? And for that, I'm going to come to maybe start with you, Alex. And I want to know about insurance industry. Clearly, is one of the privileged industry, which I would say is doing okay. Right? I'll not say they're doing phenomenally well like a Google or Microsoft, which announced results which are, absolutely monstrous. Insurance is not doing too badly, right? It's doing okay. So how should people kind of approach them? How should people brand themselves up in this COVID-19 normal?
Yeah, so I get 2 questions. I think that insurance, as you said, I think insurance has been very resilient and has weathered this storm a lot better than perhaps a lot of other industries. I think unemployment rates are lower when we look at insurance as a sector. And if we look at earnings and revenue, despite what Hong Kong has gone through, insurance companies are still kind of pushing through some decent, solid numbers. So long may that continue. I think if we look at how people should brand themselves, whether it's for insurance or any industry, I think for me, a lot of people just kind of start building lists, whether that's in the form of a CV, whether it's a LinkedIn profile. I think for me, this is the opportunity for people to take stock, to really kind of take a step back, use this moment in time to think, right, okay, what do I want to do? What am I good at? What are my core skills? What are my technical skills? Where can I add value? What do I bring to the table? And I think only then can you really kind of sit back and then practically start to think about, okay, insurance as an example, how can I transfer? If I'm not working in insurance now, but that's an industry that's doing well, it's progressing, it's moving forward in a positive way, how can I rebrand myself? And I think a lot of it is looking at transferable skills. Thinking, how can I make that transition? But again, I think proactivity is key. I think that sitting kind of redoing a CV kind of for endless hours every day, I think time can be better spent. As an example, networking. Hong Kong's a fantastic place in terms of networking. And the ability to pick up the phone, even remotely in these days, and get in front of people within your network. Look at how you can get from one person to the next person. I think there's a lot of value in terms of being proactive.
No, thank you very much, Alex. And Sid, I want you to kind of comment and add to it. How do people make themselves visible to you, right? You, the employer, when you're looking for a particular position, clearly, you're looking at 1,000 CVs, and obviously, I don't know if you're going to agree, but most often out of the 100 application an individual make, maybe it's lucky if 2 of them respond, right? They just go into some black hole.
Yep.
Because Hong Kong is a lot of relationship market, and Alice did allude upon, pick up the phone. What other ways would you recommend people make themselves visible to you and the employers?
Yep. That's an excellent question because that's a question I frequently ask my clients who tend to be heads of HR or CEOs in Hong Kong. And again, just coming back to my previous point, there is a big lens which every business in Hong Kong, globally in fact, is looking at costs, right? That is why we're in the situation. And so as a candidate, as someone looking for a new role, put yourself in that shoe and say, okay, well, this company wants to hire this person, but there is a cost pressure. What can I do to solve that problem? So something which Alex touched upon briefly was problem solving. So if you're a developer, you're going to go to an interview to meet a CTO, hear the project out first, understand what they're trying to do, and then sell your experiences, your strengths against that project. Not the job description, but what they're trying to accomplish. Because if I'm a CTO and I'm sitting and I'm hearing that, that's the perfect candidate. They're able to understand exactly what I want and actually deliver. and they can understand the whole workflow. That's a person hitting the ground running quickly, right? And that's a good hire. I think the second thing, which a lot of people, and this may not be the best for me, but a lot of heads of HR, are telling me that internal referral is a thing that's been around for years and years, but it's always sidelined. It's very easy to pick up the phone, call a headhunter, just like you and myself, Alex, and 48 hours you have top 5 people in Hong Kong. But when you're looking at a cost perspective, you then need to actively promote this and incentivize people to say, okay, well, if you are able to refer X, Y, Z to me, let's up that referral. It's still cheaper than using someone like myself or perhaps a job board. And this is good advice for people looking for a role, because again, everybody is looking at costs. And so I find internal referrals, word of mouth, and I think someone like you briefly touched on before, who's been in the industry a long time, oftentimes your Rolodex is the most powerful Rolodex, sometimes than a recruiter as well, because all you need to do is to put a couple of feelers out, and they will then look at their internal job list and say, okay, this one looks good. If a business head has referred you in, your chances of getting an interview are 9 out of 10 times, versus perhaps going through, like you said, an application list. And I think we need to do a lot of work on that over the next 10 years of how candidates are going to be screened, responses, employee value proposition. That's, I guess, a whole other topic. But these are the other couple of ways which I feel are very powerful, and people tend to get roles much more easily than the traditional ways.
Yeah. No, thank you, Sid, for that. And I just want to kind of go to Narayan and check on technology. Hong Kong is MLF, which is medicine, legal, finance, right? These are 3 top industries people look at. But technology is kind of rocketing, if you like, across the world. And in Hong Kong, I think it is impacting in a good way, right? And I want your view. But before that, I want to check with Shalina, how much time we have left so that we can budget for Q&A.
12 minutes precisely.
Okay, we got 12 minutes. Good. So, Narayan, technology, right? So this industry, which clearly is growing in the COVID-19 world. So what's your recommendation for people from a skill perspective? And I'm going to borrow Alex's word, to reinvent themselves to get into the technology field. And what's your view on overall the technology industry's future?
See, I think, as we have seen in this crisis, right, like organizations which have been better prepared on a technology front, more so on digital media in terms of like reaching out to their consumers, fulfilling demand, have been like sort of like weather the storm a little better. Like even if I look at like segments on like which we anticipated that people may not spend much money, like luxury retail and beauty and cosmetics. It's happened the other way around in like large geographies where the uptake has been very, very high, right? And the beauty of this crisis has generated a new sort of like industry, like new leaders or influencers, social celebrities picking up. So that's like gaining a lot of credence in like markets like say China or India. Speaking about like technology in Hong Kong, you're right. Actually, it's never been the most sought after industry to attract talent, because people sort of like gravitate towards the financial services sector, and like Hong Kong with its branding and positioning of being a financial hub is only adding more fuel to it, right? But right now, as we speak, it's very hard to actually spot an industry which is not going to actually have a tech flavor to it, which is why we are seeing an amazing onslaught of like fintech, beauty tech, prop tech. Almost every industry has appended the word tech to it. And what is also happening is like the flip is happening, right? Like fintech is now starting to be referred as like tech fin. So I think technology is like here to stay. I think it's only going to actually gain momentum as we progress. So I think it's a wonderful time for people to actually jump onto the digital space, because there are some pockets within the whole digital world which are still to be tapped to their full potential. Case in point being around like cyber security, data and analytics. These are areas in which there is a growing demand like across geographies. So my recommendation would be for people to actually like look into these roles as well and see if they could make the pivot, because main advantage of getting into tech is like it's not only a stream around like being a pure tech developer, but there are also streams where your industry knowledge becomes extremely valuable. And when industries are looking to reinvent themselves for the digital world, there's going to be like opportunities around like process, right? If someone understands the insurance processes pretty well or the banking process well, only then is he going to be able to recommend on like how it is going to change in the new to be world, leveraging the tech magic.
Yeah. So thank you very much. And I just have a quick follow-up question, and then I'm going to go to Shalina for Q&A. So you spoke about process as a skill person, and I don't want to talk about the hard tech guys, which know clearly. So if I'm a data scientist, I know I need to do Python, one of those. But I'm talking about the generalists, So for example, both Sid and Alex alluded you can reinvent yourself. So how to reinvent? So what are the top skills you're going to say that a person who's want to enter the tech industry or enter some area of tech? So I know I'm picking up process. Is there anything else which a person should acquire which will make him relevant in the future?
See, there are hard skills which can be picked up, right? Be it like data analytics and like all these things. Doesn't only warrant about you understanding a particular tool or a package or a language, right? It's more about like, how can you dream up a use case of to use this? And right now the problem in the industry is like tech is like no longer the problem. Costs have like gone down like massively. It's about the imagination and creativity on like how you're going to leverage it, right? So it's just not about like process. Like if I take the case of analytics, what are the metrics I need to look at? And if you're like still going to automate the traditional metrics using the new age technology, I don't think you're going to massively turn around the fortunes of your particular organization.
Yeah.
The only way you're going to actually like change it is like leveraging your knowledge of the industry and sort of like padding it up with like what do you see as the future. It's a very hard one, which is why in the digital world you have the license to experiment, and there is this like famous terminology again of like fail fast, right? So that's the whole beauty about this agile digital kind of world where you do something, you figure it out whether it actually makes sense, whether it is moving the dial in the positive direction. If not, then you actually like retrace and like start doing something again.
Yeah.
And for people to reinvent, Hong Kong again has been very fortunate in terms of like growing the entire startup ecosystem in like 2029. So if you're having a downtime now, that's a classic place to actually like sharpen your skills or like pick up new skills, because those guys are actually bleeding in terms of like trying to attract talent and not being able to pay the wages or something like that, right? Like they're dependent on subsidies from the government and other things. Like you can actually do a bit of like volunteering and like sort of like benefit them as well as like benefit yourself in terms of like picking up a new skill.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much. And I think, the point I want to reinforce from what you just said, we got process, we got data analytics, and you don't need to go deep, there's decision making with data. There's creativity, there's, agile management. So all great things. And now I'm going to kind of look at Shalina to check if we have any questions for our expert panelists.
We actually do. I particularly found this this setting really, really interesting. It was really insightful to hear all of your contribution and sharing. I have a question for Sid. You talked a little bit about the employee or anybody that's looking for a job and their approach to finding work. One of the things that you said as part of your first option was being able to solve a problem. And being able to solve a problem really means understanding that role beyond what the job description is. It also revolves perhaps being able to find out who the persons are, who the hiring managers are, and maybe speaking to them ahead of even their CV being screened. Now, that's an ideal situation. What does someone like, someone that's walking into a particular position and he looks at the job description and thinks, wow, I tick all the boxes, but I don't really know behind that role. I don't really know what problems they're trying to solve to be able to stand out. How would you suggest that approach be capitalized?
I think that's a very good point, and I guess the short answer, it depends case by case, because we could be talking about any organization. I think a couple of things that you could do. We live in a modern world. LinkedIn is an excellent tool which I use and probably other uses every day. It gives you a flavor of having a look at the line manager, like you said, or a colleague. Have a click, look at the content they're sharing, look at some of the things they're talking about. That's a great way to get a bit of flavor, a high-level flavor around what are they interested in, what are they interested to talk about or share ideas about. That's one. Two, I think it's if we just talk, let's say, just for the sake of discussion on financial services, there is no unique problem to one organization. It's probably an industry-wide problem, and every bank or securities firm is trying to tackle that problem. So it only takes a couple of phone calls to your friends, your network, even a recruiter, to say, hey, can you give me a couple of tips and ideas? What's happening in that organization? I think most recruiters in Hong Kong, given it's a slightly quieter time for us, have the time to be able to answer those questions, because any good recruitment agency will treat the job seeker the same way as a person who's an employer, because eventually that job seeker will become someone who employs people. So, those are the other ways. And I think just generally doing reading, lots of reading in that space. There's no harm, subscribing to some blogs, or looking at some local news media outlets. Generally speaking, if any business is trying to solve a problem or hire for something specific, there will be some sort of a news article related to the high-level aspect. And then you can ask those questions during the interview stage.
Yeah. That's fantastic. Fielding and just trying to get as much intel from whatever sources, be it the recruiter, be it your people within your network, i.e., or even the internet. Fantastic. Okay, well, thanks for sharing that. We have another question. This might be to any one of the three of you, or of you. How can I shift from finance field to fintech? Any suggestions? It sounds like this person almost has a bit of a passion for technology and maybe is dabbling into it. How does one do that?
So I want to check, anyone wants to take a shot at that? Okay, Narayan.
See, I'm more in consumer industries, but nevertheless, we'll take a shot at it. See, if I look at fintech industry, particularly in Hong Kong, right, like the fintech community has done a phenomenal job in terms of evangelizing and hustling around and creating buzz about fintech. 3 years ago, people are speaking about Singapore in the region, right? But then the FTHK has done a phenomenal job in picking up, and these guys have got multiple committees within the whole fintech space, because fintech is a very umbrella kind of a term. You scratch fintech, there are multiple things underneath.
Yeah.
Dealing with private banking, blockchain, AI, regulation, technology, and all those things, right? So very easy for you to actually reach out to people who are part of FTHK, attend some of the meetings and industry talks they have conducted. And recently there has been a leadership change in the FTHK in Hong Kong as well, right? So there's a lot of momentum in terms of what they want to do. It's a question of how well you want to. You basically want to identify what your passion is, get connected to them and see how you can actually start picking up, contributing, and learning.
Anyone wants to add?
Yeah, I can add to that. I think just adding on to Narayan's point, I think the fintech Hong Kong ecosystem is still small, in my opinion. I think it's got miles to go in terms of broadening the scope, having depth and volume. And I find, at least in my experience, most fintech CEOs are very open to replying to messages on LinkedIn. So, if you're really passionate about a certain fintech company that, is a game-changing business in a specific area, shoot a note to that person or anyone in that organization. That is probably, that's probably the one thing that makes you stand out, because again, fintech is a new and upcoming space. When I say new, I mean, it's been around for a couple of years, but they want hungry people, they want passionate people, they want energetic, proactive people. And by doing that, you stand out straight away.
I agree. I mean, just a little bit of a comment on my side. The little that I know about fintech is a lot of the budding fintechs are startups anyway. And these are people that are looking for talent, perhaps not mid to low wage. So they're always open to doing that intern or providing that level of support to anybody that's entering in the field.
Yeah, and if I may kind of just, wrap it up for everyone, this fintech question, because that's a great one and it's kind of reinvention of a person. So what you want to choose as an individual is a specific category. And there are three broad categories if you want to transition from industry to fintech. Number one is domain. So are you a credit risk expert? Are you a trade finance expert? And if you are, so you want to kind of go to a fintech which is specializing in that area and you talk about your domain expertise. So that's number one. Number two is the technology side. Are you a developer? Are you somebody who's kind of good with data analytics? Now, that is a second category of jobs you can look at. And the last one is the business side, right? Are you a negotiator? Are you great at creating funding or increasing the funding for those people or managing people? Because obviously, these are a different bunch of animals. And I mean, no disrespect, the fintech culture is totally radical compared to the industries. We call them dinosaurs versus unicorns. So if you are in a dinosaur like HSBC, where I used to work very proudly, but I will also call them a dinosaur. And if you're joining a fintech, which is kind of, aggressive, fun-based, you want to see that what is the value you can add in the business, and you need that. And one recommendation for people is to watch the movie Intern for Robert De Niro, by Robert De Niro, featuring Robert De Niro. Mm-hmm. That's a great example where that gray hair is very useful in a startup.
Precisely. That's wonderful, thank you. We've got two more questions, and this is for, I would say, more towards Sid, but open for anybody else to answer in the area of recruitment. So we have a question, and the question is, I am a trainer, soft skills. Any suggestions for me, what new skills I should develop to keep going with the shift in industry demand?
Sorry, was that trainer or trader?
Trainer.
Okay, sorry.
Soft skills.
Those are very different questions.
Yeah.
One's a trader, one's a trader. I think, honestly, I've seen a sudden surge of training jobs in Hong Kong, believe it or not. And these are, with both large organizations as well as, it's a tough one to call it. These are new umbrellas within a large organization. Providing coaching, providing leadership development. Now can't be the best. It can be probably the best time right now to be able to get good trainers in any large insurance businesses, for example, where there's a big push. At least what I read, big push of hiring in GPA within that insurance space. Right? What does a good agent look like? How do you develop teams if you're a unit manager? And so on and so forth. So I have seen quite a number of roles that, in terms of certification, again, in my experience, I've seen different heads of L&D have a different preference if the role reports into a head of L&D. Some heads of L&D don't actually, they don't really care too much about your certification. They like the way you talk. They will give you a mock test in many cases, and some really like certification. So again, you've got to pick and choose the organizations that you want to work for. But again, keep an eye out there. I have definitely seen quite a number of roles. Maybe you're not looking in the right area, or you are. Definitely retail banking, insurance, and within that sort of, how do I call it, the larger businesses, they are certainly doing a lot of hiring in that space.
Yeah. And I can just supplement that, because we have gone through that transition at LSL Global. So clearly 90% of business last year was offline, but this year almost 90% is online. But what we managed to do is we managed to kind of ship out 600 solutions around e-learning, around virtual training. So everything we're doing is technology oriented today. But we managed to do that shift, and it was a lot of hard work for 3 months. So people out there who are trainers, who are finding it difficult to get a job, you don't have a choice, my friends. You really have to pick up those skills of virtual training, like what we're doing now. We were not used to all this, but now we're kind of doing it efficiently because we learned it slowly and steadily.
Absolutely. I might be able to speak, but I know very little about camera setup, which is something that I just learned on the fly. We've got one last question. And again, this is once again from an employee who's looking for work. How can I contact the hiring manager if they don't respond back to the LinkedIn request after the application and cover letter? Now, we'll see this a lot. what you suppose the best approach is, and how are you getting their attention?
Do you want to take this one?
Yeah,
We leave the best for last.
it's a good question, right? And I think that it depends on who the hiring manager is, because some people are just adamant that they won't be engaged. So you just won't get a reply whatever you do. But
Sure.
leaving that scenario sort of aside, I go back to Sid's point earlier on. I think problem solve. What's the reason? Why do you want to connect with that person? If you know that that person within an organization is someone that you want to work for, and you feel that you can add value, you bring something to the table, then go in with that message. Problem solve. Give them a solution. Give them a reason to engage with you, to want to kind of reply, pick up the phone, and have that conversation, so the interview can take place. It depends whether you're going direct. It depends whether you're going through a search firm. It depends whether it's a colleague that works there that's a friend that's referring you. So use what you have that's available, but definitely going with a strong message. Right? I go back to my point earlier on. Tell the story. Kind of get that story.
You've got to be a bit of a brave heart.
Exactly. Sell yourself. Right. That's essentially what you need to do.
Oh, fantastic.
I can add to that, and perhaps as a job seeker, I know when you hear these things, it's it's all well and good, but you still don't get that reply.
Yeah.
And so how do you tackle that? It's a two-pronged approach. You've got to be realistic as to, okay, well, this organization could actually have 10 internal referrals. Maybe you missed the boat. It's fine. Let's move on to the next one.
Yeah.
So you have to have a bit of patience. I know it's a tough thing to say.
And playing the numbers game a little
And
bit.
play a little bit of the numbers game, but in
Yeah.
a targeted way. I don't mean to say you send your CV everywhere in the market, but sometimes, there is a little bit of luck that sometimes will go your way for whatever reason. There's lots of applications, as we all know. But again, problem solve, stand out of the crowd, send those emails. I don't recommend necessarily picking up the phone. Some employers actually don't like that. I have had heads of HR tell me that they sometimes blacklist those candidates, which is a little bit weird. But again, I would suggest do a softer approach initially, and then you can take that forward from there.
Oh, perfect. Well, thank you so much for your sharing. I think we've had some really insightful contribution today. I hope our attendees listening in have learned as much as I have. Let me hand over to Aalok.
Yeah, thank you very much, Shalina. And we had a great panel discussion today. And just to recap, and because I want to invite you to give a closing message to our audience, one line, and I'm going to give you a minute to think till I recap what we covered today. So obviously, we kind of went through the implications of the crisis, the challenges, the skills, the jobs we had. We went into redundancies, we went into termination, all the problems you can think of. And then finally, we got into possibilities, opportunity. But the highlight of the discussion was personal branding. And how do you reach out to recruiters like these, great ones? You've got two in front of you right now. So, you can LinkedIn them. I'm sure they would see a surge of applications after that. But more importantly, even employers, right? So if you need people, this is actually one of the good times to hire, because I don't know about the money part of it, but the employee or the potential candidate, he will respect you for that. In a downtime when you're hiring, they kind of respect that you're taking that courage to hire. So we covered a lot of that, and then we kind of went into skills. How do you reinvent yourself? Because the future may not stay dark forever. Eventually, there's going to be light at the end of the tunnel. So may I invite maybe Narayan to give a closing statement, closing remark for our audience, and we can follow with Sid and Alex.
Thanks, Aalok. I thought it was a very interesting discussion. Speaking of the technology industry, right? I'm reminded of two things, and I think I'll leave the audience with these two things. And both of them are from Satya. When he actually picked up Microsoft, he wrote a mail to his employees explaining about his role and what does he intend to do. And this was done in 2014, and we know what happened to the fortunes of Microsoft ever since, right? There was a very interesting line in that mail, which has always stuck with me, and which I think everyone working in the tech industry, or for that matter, any industry, needs to remember and reinforce themselves from time to time. The line was, our industry does not respect tradition. It respects only innovation, right? So I think that's something which each of us needs to constantly like remember as we go along. The second thing, again, from Satya Nadala's famous book on like hit refresh, right? And looking at this whole COVID situation, I think this is a perfect time for all of us, both at micro as well as at macro level, to actually like figure out like what do you want to do going forward, because all of us pretty much like we get into comfort or like we figure out like there's always some reason for us to not do something or like experiment something, right? When the chips are down, maybe you're like better off by experimenting. And like going forward, I think the people who are like sort of like fearless or can experiment and like figure out like new avenues, I think they probably will get rewarded and like be in a much more better state compared to the rest. So I think may not be to the comfort of everyone, but better for you to actually like learn and like get on to that realm as quickly as possible.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And those of you who did not catch that name, it is Hit Refresh. If there's anyone I love more after Steve Jobs, it is Satya Nadella. So do look that up, my friends. Sid.
Yeah, I think we've talked a lot, and I think probably in the past couple of hours we've all talked about technology quite a bit. I want to step away from that just to cater to the viewers who are not in the technology space and maybe don't have any interest in that space. There's a lot of us out there. I think there are 3 tips I can give you right here, right now, that's going to help your job search. I think number 1, be open to contract roles. It is not a bad thing at all. That's something, if you're able to get a nice, interesting role, phenomenal. Take that role, do it for 6 months, 3 months, whatever it may be, because this market's only going to get better, right? That's 1. 2, in Hong Kong, myself, our business here has seen a very dramatic shift of employers that we work with, and a very big language requirement now is Mandarin for whatever reason. And again, that's only going to continue. And so again, if you have spare time, just like you said, the chips are down, invest in a language. It's a language worth knowing. It's going to help you in your job search, and there's never a bad thing to learn a new language. The last thing is a little bit cheesy. Stay positive. In the last 6 months in my firm, we have placed people who have been out of the job for a year, 9 months, 6 months. We've got families to feed. I understand, absolutely. They've all got jobs, right? So you just need to have a bit more patience. I know it's easy to say that, but there is light at the end of the tunnel.
Yeah. Thank you, Sid. No, absolutely love that. I would say I try Mandarin very hard, but I learned a bit of it, but not enough to get a job. But yes, maybe I'm going to go back to that. Alex.
Quick one for me. I learned a new word this week, liminality. And that is the moment in time between where you let go of the past, but you haven't quite started the journey ahead of the future. And I think for somebody looking for a role that's out there in the market, whether they're terminated, hired, made redundant, whether they're in a role but they're looking to change, I think use that time wisely. Reskill, reinvent yourself, be proactive, network, get out of the market, engage with people like us, people like you, Aalok, and look, whatever you can do. Be positive, as Sid said, and get out there and use that time wisely.
Thank you, Alex. And I'm going to go to Shalina for the closing. We've come to the end of the day, but I want to say one last thing from my side. And one of the things I'm picking up from the 3 guests and experts over here is kind of whether you use the word chips are down, whether you use the word, upskill yourself or liminality, whatever you may say. I have a phrase for you, a mantra for you to remember in this COVID-19 world. Remember, when fishermen can't go to sea, they repair their nets. So essentially, get more skills, learn new things, prepare. Because when you prepare and when the opportunity knocks on the door, it's going to be yours. Shalina.
Thank you. Upskilling has really been the theme today. Thank you to all of the panel speakers. Phenomenal. So thank you again. And thank you to all of the rest of the speakers prior to the panel discussion. We also want to thank our attendees that have attended today's session. Thank you so much once again. We hope that you will join us again. Special thanks to William Hodgson, the event producer, without whom this would not have been possible. So thank you, William, for all of your hard work and orchestration. And finally, we also want to thank Spaces as sponsors. Now, being a part of this webinar, LSF's aim is to support the community through very challenging times, such as this, in a number of different ways. LSF offers personal coaching, next level skills building, and management consulting. So stay with us for another webinar coming up to you hopefully soon. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye. Bye.